encounter.
The huge vortices of energy created by our technologies present us with unfathomable consequences. Put a decent man in an airplane a few hundred feet above a village, and he will kill without compunction, inflict appalling pain and injury on men, women, and children. That bomber pilot is really very much like the person introducing any new technology. None of these people ever consider what will be the impact or the effect of what they do when they pull that trigger. We cannot trust our instincts or our natural physical responses to new things. They will destroy us. How are we to get out of the maelstrom created by your own ingenuity? Edgar Allan Poe has a story called The Descent into the Maelstrom. Poe imagines the situation in which a sailor who has gone out...
When I was young, I fished with my brother out beyond the vortex of the maelstrom. We had great luck in those cross currents until the day the sky let loose a furious tempest. The heaving sea swallowed my brother, and I was swept into the chaos of the maelstrom. I could only await my eventual plunge into the abyss. With all hope lost, I found myself idly studying the action of the vortex. Some objects did not fall, but were whirled up to the level of the sea. Therein lay my salvation. I tied myself to an old steamer trunk, and I abandoned my doomed ship. Thus did I free myself from oblivion.
The huge vortices of energy created by our media present us with similar possibilities of evasion, of consequences, of destruction. By studying the pattern of the effects of this huge vortex of energy in which we're involved, it may be possible to program a strategy of evasion and survival.
Marshal Mcluhan did learn how to survive the vortex, and he wound up just like Poe's sailor.
My rescuers were old mates of mine. And yet they would not believe that my experience had been real.
Mcluhan called his discovery the laws of media. He said, there are 4 simple questions that reveal the future of all technology. But nobody took him seriously. Some said such prediction impossible, but most just assumed that the future would be bright.
I believe that he always felt that there was some underlying order and coherence in the universe.
No field intimidated him. Everything he read, he sort of wove it into a picture.
When I was young, I and my brother fished out there beyond the maelstrom.
What I saw was this great buccaneer of the word, sailing out looking for islands where the spray was thrown up by an encounter of a hard word with a soft word. That's why I think of him as a poet. That is a creator metaphor who takes all those chances as a poet does.
His joy was to relate things that other people thought were unrelated.
When I have had a bit more philosophy and psychology, I'm going to work out some of the great laws that govern the affairs of men, temporal and spiritual. I believe it will be the biggest step ever taken in philosophy if 100 or so of these laws could be worked out and studied.
The laws of the media are observations on the operation and effects of human artifacts on man and society. They are at least a hope that we can reduce this confusion to some sort of order.
The first question to ask of any technology, any tool, is what will this thing enhance? You begin with so little to help you survive. Just your wits and your senses. Your eyes collecting detail. Your ears sweeping a sphere. Your nose riding the wind.
We're in a good position. Wind's coming at us.
Every tool extends your body, senses, or mind. Extends, say, your fingernails. Or your skin. The things you make, they mimic you. They're like you, but a you that's enhanced. containers extend your arms. The chair extends your bum and spine. Tools change the way you touch and are touched. It's all translation. It's a loop.
All of man's artifacts of language, of laws, of ideas, hypotheses, tools, clothing, computers, all of these are extensions of our physical bodies.
But they all extend, they all translate in their own particular way. The alphabet, mother of Western invention, extends the I.
E is for elephant. An elephant is an Asian elephant. Do you?
The phonetic alphabet has a very peculiar set of characteristics. It is made up of phonemes, that is, bits that are meaningless. The 26 letters of our alphabet have no meaning at all.
C is for caterpillar. Caterpillar. Your eye follows from letter to letter, word to word, line to line. The printing press extends the alphabet, letter by letter, word by word, page by page, book by book by book. Until your eye can fly through space and time, across the known universe, line by line. It's translation. It's a loop. You shape your tools in your own image, and in their turn, they shape you. Shh. Quiet in the library. It's not a hockey rink.
One of the strange implications of the phonetic alphabet is private identity. Before literacy, there had only been the tribal group.
Rewriting expression as a product of two.
Essential for obtaining various modification as
damp fabric on damp brown people.
Literacy marched steadily in the direction of fragmenting and separating and classifying data, turning men into specialists who pursued individual subjects and individual themes and goals quite without relation to one another. People who are subjected to the arrangement of language visually in lines, highly sequential and precise, rigid, develop habits of arranging their lives, arranging their whole social existence, which are very closely geared to these forms. They're not especially aware of this. The visual world has the properties of being a sort of continuous and connected, homogeneous, rational, logical, private, individualistic, civilized world.
The things you make, they mimic you. Though, frankly, it's sometimes hard to see the resemblance.
And this is the old myth of Narcissus.
All our Jaguars come with tradition behind them. And
the word narcissus means narcosis, numbness, drugged. And Narcissus was drugged into thinking that that image outside himself was somebody else. Narcissus did not fall in love with his own image. He thought it was somebody else.
It's simply amazing what's gone on into this car.
And the same with us. In our technological and gadgetry and gimmickry and so on, we don't think that is merely a part of our own physical organisms extended out there.
It's a wonderful car.
We're like Narcissus, completely numb.
When you take one out for a drive, which we'll do momentarily, you will then see why Jaguar will be your next purchase.
Now, when we put out a new part of ourselves, extend a new part of ourselves by technology into the outer environment, we protect ourselves by numbing that area. The more I looked at this, the more difficulty I had in explaining why people ignored it.
He was somebody who realized early on that something that made life bearable was our ability to observe and to enjoy this incredibly rich world that we live in.
His mother reading to him every day, most of English literature must have held a love for language, a love for ideas.
I think she had every influence.
His mother was an elocutionist. She used to go around tours of Canada, reciting poems, doing dramatic monologues, and so on.
I've often said she was the most intelligent woman I've ever met, and most frustrated because there was no outlet. His father was not a literary man, perfectly charming, gallant.
His dad, I think, was very much an amateur philosopher. A kind of very high-minded view of life where you were always trying to grapple with the higher things, you know, metaphysics and the Bible. And he delivered a talk to the local church on a topic called the higher plane. Mcluhan was always quite a serious young kid. He was encouraged to and eagerly memorized long passages from poets. I think for the young Marshal, literature was the higher plane.
Now, he went to Cambridge after he already had a BA and MA from Manitoba. He felt that a BA from Cambridge would be far superior to an MA at Manitoba.
If you can imagine the excitement that Cambridge must have been. And that's where he was, the very brilliant young man, was doing utterly good stuff.
All of my father's work had its genesis really in his PhD. Ostensibly, he was studying Thomas Nash, an Elizabethan satirist.
So the first thing Marshall did was he realized that if he wanted to talk about the rhetoric of Nash, he had to go back and find out everything from the beginning. We all should do it that way. You read one text, and that gives you a set of questions. Where did this come from, and what did it mean? And you have to keep going back and back and back.
Looking at the entire tradition took him back to Greece and Rome and the study of the trivium, the ancient intellectual establishment, which hadn't been done before.
And the trivium was basically logic, rhetoric, and grammar. Grammar was the study of language. Rhetoric was how to present yourself, your ideas, your insights. And of course, logic was logic. Mcluhan came to believe that the history of culture was the history of the ongoing struggle between these three alternate ways of looking at things. Mcluhan was fascinated by grammar and rhetoric.
Grammarians weren't just people interested in things like parts of speech and syntax and punctuation, but they looked at the world as a book. So he trained himself as a grammarian right there.
It's almost as if he shared the medieval notion of the two books. One book was the written book, the Bible. The other was the book of the universe, where you could also read that book because the creator of both books had invested them with that coherence. And of course, when he became a Catholic, that was solidified. The great philosopher of Catholicism, Thomas Aquinas, says faith is consistent with reason.
He found in Aquinas a sort of kindred spirit, another grammarian, a man who took all knowledge, all learning as his province.
Thomas Aquinas says, trust the authority of the senses. And then there's a kind of almost medieval notion of the five senses as working together in a kind of workshop to recreate reality in the mind of the individual. So Mcluhan always believed that if you really listened and saw and felt, you could perceive correctly.
Catholic has some assurance that all parts of the world will bear inspection, that they're all good.
He was an intensely religious person. It was his very being. He was an intellectual. I recognized that at once. During our courtship, the poetry Marshall always read was, to me, difficult and devious, maybe Pound, maybe Eliot. And the poetry I read was romantic poetry. And we climbed mountains together, spouted poetry off to each other. Didn't have a chance. I mean, romance, wow. And we got married in 1939. He was sure there wasn't going to be any war. Well, I learned later he hadn't looked at the newspapers or listened to any of the broadcasts. I often said that Marshall's priorities, first, his faith. His second priority was his intellectual life. And then I often said that I ran a third place in the race. He did much of his work lying down on the couch with the doors closed. Children couldn't come in. Eric, as a little boy, in grammar school, I remember his going in once and saying, "Dad, why don't you get a job?" He worked all the time, which he couldn't help. It was he, day and night, getting abstracted, even in company. The old brain was too active, I think.
My first teaching job was at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. When I got up to face freshman classes there, I realized I was in a strange country and that I had to learn a good deal about it from the very ground up.
I think at a certain point in his life he realized that he was a bit of a dweeb when it came to relating to North American young people. He's trying to teach literature to students in the States when he's a young assistant professor. And they don't understand what he's talking about. And he didn't want to fail in that way.
He thought that the way to get their attention was to show them the things that they thought they knew, advertising. And show them that they didn't know it, that they didn't pay attention to it. If they did pay attention to it, they'd realize that their brains were being massaged. And they were oblivious to this environment, even at the same time as they were sort of robotically conditioned by the environment.
Advertising is a vast military operation, openly and brashly intended to conquer the human spirit. The advertiser is a manipulator, yes. He plays around with human beings as his private pigment. He smears us. Students and historians of the future will pour over our advertising world with the sort of intensity with which we should long ago have directed to it.
He calls
describes it, yeah, the mechanical bride, so that something which should be natural is no longer natural. It's being created by the new language of industry, so that you're no longer in charge. You're being managed by other kinds of really rather debased speech.
What kind of a world would you rather live in?
I'd rather be in any period at all, as long as people are going to leave it alone for a while. Just let go, just leave it now. I am resolutely opposed to all innovation, all change, but I am determined to understand what's happening. Because I don't choose just to sit and let the juggernaut roll over me. Now, many people seem to think that if you talk about something recent, you're in favor of it. The exact opposite is true in my case. Anything I talk about is almost certainly to be something I'm resolutely against. And it seems to me the best way of opposing it is to understand it, and then you know where to turn off the button.
That, I think, is the cornerstone of Marshall's fascination with modern arts of communication. You had to figure out how these things were working. Remember the beginning of The Mechanical Bride, when he says that about Poe's sailor?
Edgar Allan Poe has a story called The Descent into the Maelstrom.
The story itself, central to his thought.
What Mcluhan saw in the Poe story is that it was a place where you were always moving, because that's what the environment does. You're always in a process. And since you're being massaged and you don't even know how you're being massaged, you can't step back, but by being with it, you would realize its structure or its pattern.
The second question is, what will this tool obsolesce? What normal ways are bound to fade in light of your new invention? Old tools may hang around, but if you want to get the job done, you're going to want the latest thing. And then, before you know it, you can't seem to find a decent buggy whip or blacksmith. Something ventured, something lost. Your new silver wheels lend power to your feet and numb the rest of your body. Your fields and farms must retreat from the rising tide of the city.
The new acceleration of travel tends to push the metropolitan membrane, or stretch it right around the planet. The herb orbs. So that in effect, if not in theory, there really is only one city on the planet itself.
You do away with the ancient rhythms of day and night. Every time you flick on an electric light, you reshape the space all around you. New figures appear. New connections are made. A new world arises out of the old.
With the kinds of power and energy now available, it is possible to create environments anywhere overnight, just like laying on electric lighting. These are environments that alter all human affairs and all human relationships in any part of the world.
Do you still recall the mystery of the dark? Can you still follow the light of the moon?
Electric media obsolesces the visual, the connected, the logical, the rational.
Excuse this interruption, students and teachers. This is a reminder from the maintenance staff that locking bicycles against the front railing is...
What the child encounters in the present school is a carefully bureaucratized arrangement of seats, class schedules, and subject matters, all separated from one another. They are subjected to a curriculum of classified information, which they are expected to record, memorize, regurgitate in classified patterns. He comes in to that classroom from a prolonged experience of integral participation in a highly organized global situation.
Attention shoppers, don't miss the lunchtime specials today in the food court. Tasty treats from every corner of the globe.
The normal ways fade before the new. You shape your tools and they shape you.
What we have done in our time with electrical technology is to put our nervous system outside ourselves. When you extend by technology your own central nervous system, and you put your nervous system outside, we put the nervous system outside and we put it around ourselves globally. We stuff our physical beings inside the nervous system. This means that every private operator can own a hunk of your central nervous system, as if it were a wheel, a box, or a piece of land. And he can stand on your nose, your eyes, your nerves. He can exploit and move every part of your inner being by these external means. No Elizabethan had any such resources. This is a totally new information environment of which humanity has never had any experience whatever. We now, you see, have a media that stress all the senses, and we have no education to cope with this, the media at all.
was a literary man primarily. His interest in communications was secondary. Once he got involved with communications, he got fascinated by it. It was like the tentacles spreading out in all directions. And he saw the interrelationship of everything. He made the Understanding Media Group. He had representatives from the different disciplines.
He was interested in other disciplines. Now that kind of thing has become terribly fashionable now, but it wasn't fashionable then.
We met most days in the museum cafeteria. People would be there and a phrase would come out and boom, it would be taken and seized by everyone. Nobody took anybody else's ideas. We just took every idea and used them, misused them, played with them. Pretty much the way the surrealists would do in art. Mcluhan was the absolute center of a group of people doing that.
All of it really crystallizes in 7 or 8 issues of explorations that Mcluhan and his friend, the anthropologist Ted Carpenter, put out.
He's writing about Linus Pauling in chemistry and Werner Heisenberg in physics, and Cervantes and jazz music, J.Z. Young in biology, Panofsky in art history about Walter Long, and quoting every scholarly book on every subject.
In those articles, he finally, I think, articulates fully that all technologies are languages. Language itself is the supreme technology that almost gives you the entree to all the other disciplines and languages and technologies.
The people in those disciplines thought he was playing fast and loose because he had no credentials in any of those areas.
Any specialist is going to see to it that his specialty is protected against any invasion from any quarter. They've got a very good thing. They've taken a long time to acquire this specialist skill, and they don't see why they should yield 1 inch to people with different methods.
Well, Mcluhan started to make an impact with the Gutenberg Galaxy, which was 1962. And then Understanding Media came along a couple of years later, and that led to what they subsequently called the Mcluhan explosion.
The forms of entertainment that work best on television are ones which admit of a great deal of casualness, in which people can be introduced and dialogued with in the presence of the camera at all sorts of levels of their lives. You capture them at all sorts of strange and offbeat moments of their existence. Instead of going out and buying a packaged book, of which there have been 5,000 copies printed, you will go to the telephone, describe your interests, your needs, your problems, and they at once Xerox, with the help of computers from the libraries of the world, all the latest material just for you personally, not as something to be put out on the bookshelf. They send you the package as a direct personal service. This is where we're heading under electronic information conditions.
And then, of course, then there's a whole other thing that happened in the business world.
Thompson House. From here, Roy Thompson operates radio and television stations, magazines, newspapers, and book companies in 20 countries. The king of communications is told he should meet the philosopher of communication, the controversial Marshal Mcluhan.
The dominant medium of communication in any age alters the way people think, feel, act, and react. Television is thus returning the viewers to the picture thinking of primitive men. Of course, I think this is all pie in the sky myself.
Dr. Mcluhan arrives.
Some of the critics of Mcluhan made fun of Mcluhan because they accused him of being a bringer of doom, and they thought they were impervious to doom.
This is the talk of a literate man. The literate man was all for absorbing things. The new sort of electric man doesn't want to absorb things.
You mean that in the future people are not going to be as literate?
Oh, indeed, yes. Literacy is on the skids. Oh, yes.
Now I understand why you got the reputation.
Oh,
I can see that. You're a shocker, isn't it?
Look,
Our own Herbert Marshal Mcluhan has been labeled the poet, the philosopher, the prophet. Life magazine called him the oracle of the electric age. His critics are almost as lively as his admirers. They call him a gadfly, spellbinder, a word merchant. But almost everyone agrees no one can make sense out of more than 10% of what Mcluhan has to say. And
What kind of message are you trying to get across?
The kinds that are indicated in what I've already said. Just anything that creates a state of awareness, which makes life a more exciting and wide-awake matter. The term Finnegan's Wake, the title of Joyce's book, is one that fascinates me, and it has much to do with the changes going on in our time. Finn, again, back to the old tribal cycle. It's what is happening in the electric age. We're becoming involved in each other again in a tribal way. Finn, the Finn cycle. Finn again, but this time, wide awake. Finnegan's Wake.
Yet man in society must make some decisions about the rights and wrongs of certain issues. Only in this way can a society function without anarchy. Mcluhan
I thought we had achieved anarchy very completely long ago. I didn't realize that it was something that remained to be done. And I think we're going further in every minute. It's like the fish in the water. We don't know who discovered water, but we know it wasn't a fish. A pervasive medium, a pervasive environment is always beyond perception.
Tonight from London, the Marshal Mcluhan Golden Probe Show.
The journalists did him a service in the sense that they attempted to present to a very wide audience what Mcluhan was all about. The journalists puffed Mcluhan, you know, because a journalist, if he's writing about something, has to say this is worthwhile. But on the other hand, sometimes they didn't understand him, and sometimes they aroused the resentment amongst the intellectual class that this guy, Mcluhan, was a charlatan who was suckering media and journalists and business and trying to make big bucks out of it.
Stand by for a Mcluhan test probe.
A lot of people were very worried about him and his effect because he was so much part of the modern world, so unprofessorial in the way in which he, you know, flipped around with these media people. They actually at one point decided to circulate a petition to have him removed from the university.
Academics are a very mean group of people, very critical. It's mostly out of jealousy, and they had a lot to be jealous about.
It then became kind of a game. People would go to their area of expertise and find one or two factual errors or others and think that they had brought down.
Then, of course, there is the matter of the fact that he's writing about a subject outside the bounds of proper scholarship. He was very excited about looking at this, whereas others often saw it as the decline of Western civilization.
I was doing my best to get Marshall interested in the offers he had had from universities in the States. We went to see Claude Bissell, president of U of T, and Claude said, "All right, Marshall, what would you think about having your own building, your own coach house?" Marshall was in seventh heaven.
That was the demonstration that he had managed to ride up over all the opposition at the university without accommodating to it become recognized by the establishment.
Tonight, in Columbian Presbyterian Medical Center in New York City, Marshal Mcluhan is recovering from protracted surgery yesterday to remove a growth on the cranium, not directly touching the brain.
He lost 5 years of memory. That was a big blow to Marshall. He jumped right back into teaching. He started a new book and finished 3. I'm sure feeling that he had to justify himself, that he was still bright After his operation, Marshall began to be particularly interested in the bicameral effects of the right and left hemispheres of the brain.
He was always interested in the senses. And for him, the environment was everything, and its interaction with the mind. So he was involved in what now is known as neurophysiology and cognitive studies, 30 years before anyone heard of it.
On the left side of the brain was linear and sequential, and the right side of the brain was holistic.
Marshall saw that there was an eternal truth there in the way in which the mind is, in effect, split and is really two minds trying to seek balance.
We're now living in a world which pushes the right hemisphere way up because it's an all-at-once world. The right hemisphere is an all-at-once simultaneous world. So the right hemisphere, by pushing up into dominance, is making the old left hemisphere world, which is our educational establishment, our political establishment, make it look very foolish.
The third question is, what will this tool retrieve from all the things you've lost?
Most memorable trip I've ever been on is when I went hunting by myself first time.
Speech retrieves old adventures, reshaped as stories, much more tidy than they ever were when lived.
He decides that he's going to have a crap in the bush sort of thing, so he gets up beside a tree sort of thing and puts his rifle there beside him, and he's down there having a crap sort of thing, and this big buck jumps up in front of him. So he's just about ready to wipe his butt, and he goes like that, and he sees that buck, and he says, "Oh yeah, come on!"
Over here we have Taurus, the bull. The head of the bull is actually an open cluster of stars shaped like a V. Most of the constellations have Greek names. The Greeks used the stars to navigate. They studied their positions and came up with ways to remember where the stars were.
The things you used to just get by come back to you as art, to help you to survive the endless stretching of your heart.
In the Renaissance, the image they saw very vividly in their rearview mirror was a medieval one. What the Middle Ages saw in their rearview mirror, what they thought was the present, was ancient Rome. What the industrial 19th century saw in the rearview mirror was the Renaissance. And what we see in the rearview mirror is the 19th century.
The more you get, the faster you go. The more you strive to retrieve a time before any time you've ever known. In the 19th century, no one thought to rebuild outpost villages simply for their charm.
The happy tendency of technological innovation tends to tidy up the old culture, whatever it happens to be, into a work of art.
If you really are curious about the future, just study the present. Because what we ordinarily see in any present is really what appears in the rearview mirror. What we ordinarily think of as present is really the past.
Content is always the previous medium, and that's all that we can see.
Modern suburbia lives in bonanza land.
It is impossible for man to look straight at the present. He is so terrified by it. We stand on the stern of the ship looking at the wake and saying we're in very troubled waters.
I do a lot of traveling, you know. And I watched this documentary the other night on the safety.
And so revivals on all hands in every phase of life today. Revivals of clothing, of dances, of music, of shows, of everything. We live by the revival. It tells us who we are or were.
So you can imagine the stress.
By another Canadian city today would have virtually wiped out their chances.
For Vancouver Whistler, it really gives us the opportunity we now are Canada's bid.
Electric media bring back the village from the distant past, where you knew everything about everybody and news traveled fast.
Now this is what I call the global village. You no longer have to be anywhere in order to do everything.
The same information is available at the same moment from every part of the world.
The world is now like a continually sounding tribal drum, where everybody gets the message all the time. A princess gets married in England, and boom, boom, boom go the drums. We all hear about it. An earthquake in North Africa, a Hollywood star gets drunk, away go the drums again.
Electric media retrieve the forest, stirring all around you.
Electric information comes from all directions at once, and when information comes from all directions simultaneously, you are living in an acoustic world. The acoustic world has no continuity, no homogeneity, no connections, and no stasis. Everything is changing. It's the same shift that Alice in Wonderland made to know him when she went through the looking glass.
Electric media retrieve the old dark age of goddesses and monsters.
Our ancestors lived in a mythic world because they had none of the literate
means of classification.
A myth is a speeded up following of a process. We live mythically ourselves so that we understand their myths now for the first time.
You should know what the stakes are. The stakes are our civilization versus tribalism. And it's a considerable revolution to have been through 2,500 years of phonetic literacy, only to encounter the end of that road. Pattern recognition in the midst of a huge, overwhelming, destructive force is the way out of the maelstrom. The huge vortices of energy created by our media present us with similar possibilities of evasion, of consequences, of destruction.
Marshall was primarily a teacher, a professor, if you will, and the students loved being in his classes.
Everyone in this room is in costume, except me. I have on a dress. You know, jeans are a costume, they're a tribal costume, and they are an expression of a strong corporate grievance against the establishment. Why do you think you wear a hick costume in an affluent business world?
Because we get a costume on.
No, you're a bunch of affluent suburban kids, and you're not hicks, but you dress like hicks. Why?
He was the only person I think I'd ever known up to that time who could in one sentence talk about the Hollywood Westerns, Plato, and then Elvis Presley. And he would connect it.
Mcluhan drove a lot of his students nuts because they were going to be tested on their knowledge of Blake and Wordsworth. They're not going to be tested on their knowledge of Batman and Pepsi Cola ads. And yet this is what Mcluhan talked about in his class.
Many people describe their key encounter with Mcluhan almost as a form of conversion experience. It is a mystical kind of experience where one moment you see the world one way, the next moment you see it very differently. Mcluhan made it very clear that the young were among the best investigators of media environments precisely because, as he put it, they didn't suffer from a hardening of the categories.
The atmosphere around here was delightful, and it was charged with a certain kind of excitement coming from the glamour of it all. Mcluhan really was a glamour person.
Family Circle, a little magazine you pick up at the supermarket. I remember his picture saying he's the most coveted after-dinner guest in America.
The most popular show on television at that time, which was The Laugh-In, Henry Gibson, I think, is a funny little nerdish character, would come out and he would say, "Marshal Mcluhan, what are you doing?" And so, like, 40 million people suddenly were aware of his name.
And the children in the park would be with, "What are you doing, Marshal Mcluhan?"
He was going all over the world, and he was world famous. His name was even a word, Mcluhan-esque.
He enjoyed every moment of his, celebrity. He enjoyed not being bothered by it. Marshall was very casual about things like that.
He was driven by ideas, absolutely. He was not driven by ambition.
Marshall never used the word celebrity. He was in demand, but a lot of crackpots are in demand, The effect that Marshall would have wanted to have was to make people think, so they could see the connectedness of everything.
Television is a serious medium. It's an inner-oriented medium. You are the vanishing point. It goes inside you. You go on an inner trip. It is the prelude, the vestibule to LSD.
A great deal of what he was doing was quite frankly throwing things out to see what they looked like the next day and how people would react to them. Many of his pronunciamenti. They were not meant to be, they were not analytically structured. They were metaphors. And he was convinced that the metaphors were worth wrestling with, but he was not always convinced they were true.
You see, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again because they were bureaucrats. They weren't turned on. But with electric circuits, Humpty Dumpty goes back together again with a rush.
Most people did not get their understanding of McLuhan from reading his books. The books, particularly as the 60s wore on, became less and less coherent. And this is partly because McLuhan was not interested in writing books. His favorite mode of communication was talking ideas out.
He wanted to get his ideas across to many people, so he did appear on television all the time. And I think that it cost him.
But when you see that juice being poured out on spaghetti, that is good TV. Glug, glug, glug. That is great TV.
Very good, thank you.
I'm going to read the book again. I still don't understand it. But
TV itself is a kind of happening, technically, and it tends to involve people in its own vortex. The media themselves can now create events that are so much bigger than people, so much bigger than the audience, that it really is a new mythic form. The coverage of the Vietnam War is done by more people than who are actually fighting in Vietnam. The numbers of people covering Vietnam business around the world and participating in it through newscasts, the numbers are many, many millions. And so the war then becomes a fiction, a colossal fiction.
The user of electronic services is largely deprived of his private identity.
and his physical body. Remember the Cheshire Cat that came on smiling minus its body?
Yes, and
that's
disappeared
us.
all but...
That's us.
Really?
Just like the Cheshire
There's
Cat in
nothing here
Alice
but
in Wonderland.
4 smiles?
It's people who are sent, not the message.
I must say, you send me. I find whenever you're on, we talk faster, we do...
I think about it for hours afterward, you know, it's been fun.
Do you know what's going on in some great American homes? Well, let me tell you. Sears' best interior latex paint.
It must be hard to be the almighty totem pole. I mean, what do you do if you're become the media guru, but you're aware of the fact that you're being asked to give sound bites and God knows what else? And how do you get out of it if the media is in fact what you're talking about?
It's one of the most painful parts of understanding McLuhan is when you read his letters beginning in the early 70s and he realizes his message has not gotten through. Nobody's really listening.
What do you think is the most, I want to use the word effective, but that's not the right word, but I'm talking about television here. What has the greatest impact on audience? Is a TV program? Is television best when it covers an event like a space shot or the Olympics or a baseball game? Is it best when it tries to entertain with movies at night? When it tries to inform with news programs?
I'm sure that McLuhan was not satisfied that he'd been understood towards the end of his life. My own feeling is that he felt that people had not bothered to understand. I think he felt keenly that his academic colleagues never really were ready to give him a hearing or to respect him. He became involved in a club called the Best Club at the University of Toronto. And this Best Club consisted of people who were heads of their own centers. McLuhan enjoyed these get-togethers. This is obviously a select group of academics. But amongst themselves, these people could not come to a conclusion as to whether McLuhan was a really great thinker or whether he was a charlatan. That question was hung over McLuhan to the very end.
By 1974, a series of works have appeared saying, in effect, that either Mcluhan is wrong or Mcluhan should not be taken seriously because he has a hidden agenda, whether as a Roman Catholic or as a conservative in terms of his values. The chief charge against Mcluhan was simply to say he's a technological determinist. What he says is the machines make the rules. Mcluhan's enduring phrase is, "Nothing is inevitable provided we're prepared to pay attention." And he never gave up to the end of his life. With Laws of Media, Mcluhan was attempting to advance a new science.
Marshal is a tool maker. He likes tools. He wants to give you tools. His probes have been very simple until now. Suddenly he comes up with his grand unified theory.
I started working with my father in the middle 60s. 10 years down the line, 1974, the publisher of Understanding Media had asked for a revision. So we started there and we finished with this project called Laws of Media. We were looking for universal laws, and we found only 4 that everything does. But these 4 questions ask you to look at what are the ripple effects? What other areas are affected, irrespective of the content? And you begin to realize media are like languages. That is, they're far more powerful than anything they're used to say. The idea that media and innovations and so on are human utterances with the properties of language, this is new. It's also extremely ancient. So the grammarian used language and the metaphor of language as a way of understanding the universe. He read the heavens as a text, he read the earth as a text, he tried to discover laws, and our laws of media are a new foray in that very ancient way of understanding.
The laws of the media are quite simply this, that every medium exaggerates some function, spectacles exaggerate or enlarge or enhance the visual function. They obsolesce another function. They retrieve a much older function, and they flip into the opposite form.
And I abandoned my doomed ship. Thus did I free myself from oblivion.
The last question is this: how will your tool reverse on you when it's pushed to its outer limit? The speed and freedom of your automobile starts to reverse the minute you leave the commercial. Too much of anything, however sweet, will always bring the opposite of whatever you thought you were getting. Books, all those bricks in the castle of knowledge, reverse into bestsellers that crush all the rest. Pushed far enough, one becomes many. Many become one. So it goes, over and over. Even the global village is coded in the end to reverse.
Do you know what the satellite does to you as an environment when it goes around the planet? It's a proscenium arch. It turns the planet into a stage. Makes you want to be an actor.
Okay, I'll give you one.
Yo. I got great shots of the little kids playing around. Okay.
You shape your tools, and they shape you. It's a loop. You start out a consumer, and you wind up consumed.
Let's just start with your reaction to what's happened here, the terrible tragedy next door.
It's so terrible, it's so horrible. I cannot give any name, you know, what kind of tragedy is this? You know, how could you kill your own kids? I don't know how she did that and why she did that.
Did you know the lady that
When you're on the phone or on the air, you don't have a physical body. You're just an image.
And
A disembodied image. A disembodied intelligence like an angel.
Any electric environment has the major characteristics of TV. That is characteristics of total involvement.
When everybody becomes totally involved in everybody, how is one to establish identity? Quest for identity is a central aspect of the electric age.
Violence is the only means by which people have ever learned how to assert or define identity.
Terrorists, hijackers, these are people minus identity. They are determined to make it somehow, to get coverage, to get noticed.
It's simply fantastic, the unconsciousness of our Western world with regard to the forces that we release upon it.
Now, the laws of the media, they are at least a hope that we can reduce this confusion to some sort of order.
By the time Mcluhan formulated the laws of media, he had effectively lost his audience. His audience had moved on.
Since these forms represent really huge extensions of our own bodies and our own nervous systems, we need a kind of ecology or equilibrium or balance among all these services.
It seems rather wicked to me, thinking back about Marshall's stroke, that a man who lived by his brains and his intellectual life should be so stricken. No, it's pretty cruel to be in Marshall's state, not being able to speak or read or write. And he was in that state for 15 months.
Marshall spent the last part of his life with us on Long Island. And Marshall at that time couldn't speak. All he could say was, boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. But he understood, no question, he understood. So we were confining ourselves to telling jokes, and he was laughing at each one and so forth. And then Marshall wanted to speak, and his hands clenched like that, and then he stood up and he just screamed. And then he got embarrassed. He smiled and laughed and went on down to walk along the beach. It must have been hell.
The university poured salt on his wounds by closing down his center.
We came down one morning to the center, and somebody had helter-skelter put all of his papers and things in a big pile to take him out to the trash.
Mcluhan just broke down. This is his life. Yeah, he started to weep, and so that was very sad. But it did epitomize that his work was not truly respected.
He died not too long after that. You know, there's so many things that I think if some of these ideas had been accepted, not twisted around, not rejected or ignored.
Of interest in Marshall now, but there was a whole generation there who scarcely knew his name, much less his work. I've talked to not just students, but young people. Marshal Mcluhan? Well, who is that? And it's the in-between generation.
It's almost impossible to go to a communications conference any place in the country and not hear someone say something that they never would have thought of if not for Marshal Mcluhan. But they don't know that. And
I think there's a possibility now that some of these ideas may come back.
Always interested in truth and looking at how the world really looked, not how we happened to see it, you see. And he's very courageous, I think. Yeah.
Let's go back to him and find things in him. And different people will take different things away from the oracle.
We have now at our fingertips at least the beginnings of a science of media ecology. But it means that we have to take charge of these things and decide not to do things as well as just to go ahead and do them. However, this, I think, is at least part of the legacy of Marshal Mcluhan. He left us with the means of control, not just the means of understanding.
And he was very far ahead of his time. He's very applicable now. And it's a mystery to me how the revival began, unless perhaps people needed some new explanation for old things. It's a mystery to me, and I'm very pleased because Marshall does have the answers to most of the problems. Not practical answers, but the theoretic answers.
The huge vortices of energy created by our media present us with possibilities of evasion, of distraction. By studying the pattern of the effects of this huge vortex of energy in which we're involved, it may be possible to program a strategy of evasion and survival.
He said, the laws of media, they come in hope, but they only work as questions. What will you gain? What will you lose? What will return from an ancient time? And what will come of this thing you create if you let it go too far? There's no order to the laws of media. All these effects are happening all the time. The trick is to recognize the pattern before it is complete.
Kierkegaard is a man of great relevance for this time. Man of the inner trip, the inner dialogue, the inner encounter. He has a wonderful quote. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards.